When something like this happens, many people would ask, cui bono, who's going to benefit from that, from these sort of activities? And when we remember in 1950s in Iraq, they did the same sort of bombing against the Jewish people in Iraq. And in those days, they were trying to force the Jewish people, they say, right now we know what's going on in Israel. They're talking about the people in Israel, Jewish people in Israel are not safe. you know the opposite way that the government of Netanyahu is claiming that everything is fine here and we're doing a lot for the people, Jewish people in Israel. But they want to make, are they, do they really want to make the situation for Jews in diaspora, they call it Jews in diaspora, but the Jewish people in Australia and other countries, that they're not safe even in Australia, they have to go to Israel? And here is what Avi Shalem, Israeli historian, said about what has happened in Iraq.
Before the emergence of the State of Israel in 1948, there was a large number of Jews living in the Arab world, something like 800,000. And there were Jews in Lebanon, in Syria, in Egypt, and Iraq. The Jewish community in Iraq was the most ancient, going back to 2.5 millennia ago. It was the most prosperous, the most successful, and the best integrated into local society. But before 48, there were Jews throughout the Arab world, and Muslim-Jewish coexistence was not a distant dream. It was everyday reality. The Jews and Arabs lived side by side until the arrival of Zionism. My family and I, we were Arab Jews. We spoke Arabic at home. We didn't speak any other language. Our culture was Arab culture. Our food was the most delicious, spicy Middle Eastern food. It wasn't European food. So in every sense of the word, we were Arab Jews. We Arab Jews had much more in common, linguistically and culturally, with non-Jews around us. We had much more in common with them than we had with Jews in Eastern Europe. In March 1950, the Iraqi parliament passed a law which said any Jew who wants to leave the country is free to do so. They have a year to register to leave on a one-way visa. And not many Jews registered to leave. And in the next year, 5 bombs exploded in Jewish premises in Baghdad, and that created a panic, and that helped to precipitate the exodus to Israel. Yosef Basri, 28-year-old lawyer and an ardent Zionist, and he was responsible for 3 out of the 5 bombs. The controller of Basri was an Israeli intelligence officer called Max Binet. He gave him the orders, he gave him the TNT. In 1950, there were 135,000 Jews in Iraq. By the end of 1952, there were only about 10,000 Jews left in Iraq, and 125,000 Jews ended up in Israel. We left Iraq as Jews, and we arrived in Israel as Iraqis. But the problem is that Israel claims to be the state of the Jews. Israel claims to speak on behalf of all Jews everywhere. Zionism is an Ashkenazi thing. It's nothing to do with...
Yeah. I think Israel today and Netanyahu is in the same situation. They're trying to do the way that history says us. What's your understanding, Professor Marandi?
Well, again, I just want to repeat that I'm not saying that the Israeli regime was behind it, but if anyone benefits, as you were raising the issue that you raised a few minutes ago, question that you raised a few minutes ago, if there's anyone that benefits from this, it would be the Israeli regime. Now, it could just be that these two men, this father and son, they, because of their extremist Wahhabi or Salafi ideology, their Takfiri ideology, came to the conclusion that they can just massacre ordinary people. And that's what they do in Iran. That's what they do when they attack Iran. That's what they do when they attack Iraq. That's what they do. That's what they've been doing in Syria with the help of Western intelligence agencies. They did that for 13, 14 years. With Erdogan was the key person coordinating these Takfiri militants, and of course the funding came primarily from Qatar. It came from across the Persian Gulf region, but primarily from Qatar, especially in the later stages. So, but it could just be because of that ideology. But if we were to go into, raise questions about it being more than just that, then obviously the country that comes to mind, the regime that comes to mind, is the Israeli regime. They've done it before. They've killed Jews. The Hannibal Directive is about killing Jews. We saw that on October the 7th, where they uh, allegedly, according to some, killed hundreds of their own so that they would not be taken as prisoners for an exchange. They've used the Hannibal Directive before in Gaza when Israeli regime soldiers were taken. And of course, a regime that carries out genocide, a regime that has no moral boundaries whatsoever, that slaughters kids on a daily basis. As we speak, on a daily basis, they're killing roughly the same amount of people who were murdered in Australia, in Gaza, every day during the so-called this fake ceasefire. Every day they're killing a number of Palestinians. Yesterday they killed 3 Lebanese citizens. I haven't seen the news today, but they're killing Lebanese every day, even though there's a ceasefire, and the Western guarantors are completely quiet because they're complicit. And in Gaza, they're preventing food from getting in. They're preventing tents from getting in. And this in the recent storm, infants died of cold, and they died of the freezing temperatures, and they're being bombed every day. So this is this they have no rules. They have no moral compass. So uh, it's clear that they could do anything. But again, that doesn't mean that they did it. But if we're going to look beyond these two people, then the first place I think that you'd have to look at is Mossad.
Yeah. The other thing you mentioned, the case of Syria, we know that it seems the one faction, of ISIS is attacking the other faction in Syria, and the main goal overall is to balkanize Syria. They're doing it, and they want to do it officially. They want to break down Syria in different regions. What is your understanding? What is happening in Syria, and how much of what's going on in Syria is related to the Turkish government, to the Erdogan government, and how much of it come from Israel and the United States?
Well, Erdogan really and Qatar, they did the most to destroy Syria among regional regimes, and they did it in alliance with the Israelis and the Americans. And now they've created a catastrophe for everyone. And Syria is moving towards disintegration. It's being balkanized, and it's obvious that it was obvious that this was going to happen. Salafism does not tolerate uh, any worldview different from theirs, including Sunni Islam, including Sufi Islam, including anyone. So, what automatically happens when you have a terrorist like Jolani in Damascus? The minorities, all of them, those who are traditionally secular, those who are moderate Sunnis, all of them are in danger. And of course, these people can, they they don't know, they don't uh, have any interest at all in developing a constitution and having elections. This is, a regime that they're going to hold on to. There won't be any. There are no plans for elections, and the U.S. representative, the Barak, who is also the ambassador to Turkey, and of course a friend of Epstein. We saw the tweet where Epstein told him to send him a picture of him and a child, so for him to smile. This despicable creature, the ambassador to Turkey, he talks about a strong Syria. But what he's trying to do is destroy Syria by by supporting Al Qaeda in Syria. He wants it to implode. In fact, he recently spoke about Syria and Lebanon, basically saying that Lebanon and Syria should belong to Syria. He only wants to create division. He wants to create war between Syria and Lebanon to create further destruction. Why? Because that's what Israel wants. Anyone who thinks US interests in West Asia are any different from the Israeli regime's interests in key issues is a fool. And those who supported the dirty war in Syria the regimes in our region, they knew that this was at the behest of the United States and for the benefit of the Israeli regime. But because of their enormous wealth, especially Qatar and other countries in the Persian Gulf region, but primarily Qatar, they have an empire of media, not just their own, but media that they fund, of cultural centers, of religious centers. So do the Saudis, so do others. They've been using them to promote sectarianism, religious hatred, to support these extremist groups, and a lot of people were fooled, uh, and they got in bed with Americans, and they supported this American conspiracy against Syria, and of course, the end result that we see today is exactly what Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah was predicting years ago. It was clear as day. And I think now a lot of those people who were influenced by these media and religious outlets, they're beginning to see the reality, the reasonable ones, the ones who now are watching what's going on in Syria. They understand that Wahhabism and Salafism and this and these terror groups, these are all detrimental to the interests of our region, to the interests of the Islamic world. And the West is constantly attacking Islam and Muslims because of these terror groups, because of these extremists, the extremists that they help create, the extremists that they support in Libya, who they supported these terrorist groups to bring down the Libyan government, and the bombing in Manchester at a concert where they killed, I think, 20, a terrorist killed, I think, 20 or so young British kids who were at the concert. He was involved in Libya. So, now whether who was behind him or whether he was doing it on his own, it could, if you look at it in the best scenario, the best case scenario, that it was a false flag operation. I'm sorry, the best case scenario is that it was blowback. Their foolish policies of supporting these terrorist groups came back to haunt them. But a worst case scenario would be that he's linked to one of these agencies. Now, this is what we see with 9/11. For years, I myself was very skeptical of people who were talking about 9/11 being more than just these 19 people. But in recent years, and I saw bits and pieces of Tucker Carlson's 5-part series. I didn't see all of it. I saw maybe one and a half, one part of it, one the first part, and I think half of the second. But from what I've seen, it's clear that it's more than just those 19 people who were involved, because people sold shares of airlines at banks right before the attack, so people knew about it. But the U.S. government won't declare their names, and of course, there are those people who are filming it, apparently linked to Israel, the Israeli regime, Mossad. That's Building 7. Again, I'm not very much familiar with the events surrounding 9/11, but the point is that these groups are heavily infiltrated, and there are people who have vested interest in using them in the West as tools. So whether it's Australia or whether it's in Manchester years ago, there are two ways of looking at it. Either they were just two people or one person carrying out an attack, then it's blowback. Or these people were linked to intelligence agencies. And if they were, they're obviously those intelligence agencies that have been working with them during these decades.